China's population has registered a fall for the first time in 60 years, indicating the start of a long-term decline. Beijing's National Bureau of Statistics also reported the country's lowest birth rate since official records began and its highest death rate in decades. China is sinking into what's known as demographic decline. At the end of 2022, its population was 850,000 people fewer than 1 year earlier. For 35 years, Chinese citizens were restricted to having one child per family. Now, despite the policy being lifted 7 years ago, the country isn't having much success in encouraging people to have more children. Its birth rate in 2022 was the lowest on record. For every 1,000 people, there were 6.8 births, down from 7.5 the year before.
年末，全国人口
By the end of 2022, the national population, including the population of 31 provinces, autonomous regions and municipalities and servicemen, but excluding residents of Hong Kong, Macau and Taiwan and foreign nationals living in these areas, was 1.41 billion people, a decrease of 0.85 million over that at the end of 2021. The number of births was 9.56 million.
全年出生人口956万人。
Well, residents living in Beijing and Shanghai pointed to the soaring cost of living, as well as the growing number of women in the workforce, as reasons behind the population slowdown.
A lot of pressure on having kids. Who dare to have kids? The unemployment rate is so high, COVID destroyed everything, and there's nothing we can do. Next year we'll have declining growth again.
This might have been an inevitable outcome. At this time, people born in the 2000s are just reaching their 20s, and many young people at the moment don't want to have kids, including the economic circumstances and the social environment, so it contributed to a declining growth in the population.
We feel that the economic pressure on young people is quite high, especially for those from outside of Beijing living here. It's already difficult. For those of us born in the generation in the 80s, there's more of us that are from one-child families. There's a lot of pressure when it comes to taking care of your parents and improving your quality of life in the future.
Well, for more on this, let's cross over to our Rise correspondent Laurie Laird, who's in London. Good to see you, Laurie. What do you make of this fall in the Chinese population?
Charles, this comes as absolutely no surprise. Demographers have been waiting for this for a very long time. I think the only surprise is that China has been willing to admit this. We had those very candid comments from the chief statistician in China just before you and I started speaking. So really, this is no surprise. I think China had hoped with the relaxation of the one-child policy 7 years ago that that would encourage people to have more children. But it's turned out that that has not been the case. China is not the only place in East Asia that is seeing declining fertility. Japan, South Korea are also having this sort of a problem. But it's interesting listening to those vox pops, those quotes that we saw from people on the street. So many of them lamented what they feel is the lack of opportunity for young people right now. And in fact, the youth unemployment rate in China is north of 20%. 1 in 5 people between the age of 16 and 24 in China can find a job. So that's certainly a dampener on aspirations to have a family.
Well, that's very interesting because, I mean, the presumption was that it was that sort of one-child policy, but clearly other issues have led to this decline. And I suppose the question is, can it be reversed?
In the short term, Charles, probably not. A lot of young people, as we said, young people do not feel that they have many opportunities. A lot of them are saddled with taking care of elderly relatives as China's population ages, and that they're sort of caught between having their own children and looking after elderly relatives. But if we look forward to 2023, we would certainly expect to see the death rate exceed the birth rate as it had at 2022, simply because of COVID. This abrupt change in zero COVID. China, many people do not believe the numbers that China is giving us for COVID deaths. People outside of China certainly believe that a lot of elderly will die during this year because they haven't been fully vaccinated against COVID. So certainly we would expect to see a much, much higher death rate in 2023 in China than we did in 2022. The other thing is that China is not particularly open to immigration. So what we have seen in some countries where you've seen declining population, Ireland is one place that comes to mind, albeit a much smaller economy. You can expand your population in two ways. You can urge people to have more children. That has not worked in China, despite all sorts of tax breaks that have been brought in over the past couple of years. Or you can allow immigration. China is not all that keen to do that.
So could this decline, Laurie, mark the start of a long-term downward trend with implications for China's economy and stability?
Without a doubt, certainly the economy, Charles, without a doubt. I mean, there are really, if you get down to it, two very simple ways to grow an economy. One is to make existing workers more productive, and China is making quite a bit of progress on that with robotics, with bits of technology, computer technology that allow existing workers to become more productive. So China does have that underway. But the other way to grow an economy is simply to add more workers to it. And that will not happen in China anytime soon.
Laurie, thanks very much indeed. Laurie Laird, a RISE correspondent, talking to me there from London. And Laurie will be back later in the program with the rest of the business.